Hello, my name is Ian Slattery from the Irish Institute of Pensions Management, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to this discussion as part of Pensions Awareness Week 2021. I'm joined by Neil MacDonald, who is Chief Executive of ISME, the Irish SME Association, and Dean McClelland, Founder and CEO of Tontine Trust, who build, issue and operate Tontine-style pan-European personal pensions, or PEPPs, across the European market. Neil, Dean, hope you're both doing well today.
Very good, Ian.
Yeah.
Hello to all.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it.
Great. Look, before we get into it, and before I go back to the guys, it might just be useful to outline a number of the key developments happening in the Irish pensions market currently, which we'll be touching on in further detail. For example, the IR2 directive, which was finally transposed in April of this year, looks set to have a profound impact on group pension schemes and indeed any pensions provided under a trust arrangement in the Irish market. There has been a draft code of practice for trustees issued. A consultation period is open currently, and the finalised document is due to be released before Christmas. Secondly, in November last year, the report of the Interdepartmental Pensions Reform and Taxation Group was published and contained a number of potential changes with the aim of streamlining not only the different types of pension products available in Ireland, but also the benefits available under each of them. This included the PEPP product, which is due to come into force across Europe next March. Finally, the concept of auto-enrolment, which would see PAYE employees automatically join their company's pension scheme, has long been proposed in the Irish context, and similar programs work across many of developed and OECD markets, including countries such as Australia and the UK, which are probably jurisdictions most familiar to Irish people in terms of a working environment. The plans in Ireland were already looking likely to be delayed, and the COVID pandemic understandably put some of those plans on the back burner. However, there is currently a lack of clarity on the timeline for implementation, and it remains to be seen what the next move there is from the government. So I suppose as an opening summary for me, there's a large amount happening, a large amount of change occurring across the pensions landscape. And I suppose it is positive from the IIPN's perspective that this is all with the aim of increasing pensions coverage and indeed pensions adequacy, as we see the share of the Irish population above pension age continuing to grow. I might turn to you first, Neil, in terms of that that last point in terms of auto-enrolment. I think it's clear the merits of such an undertaking can be seen by everybody, but once you get into the detail, it's a little bit harder to kind of grasp. And I suppose, as an opening question, what do you see the potential impact on employers and your membership in particular?
Well, first of all, Ian, we know that there's a really significant problem. We are regularly updated on the figures about pensions adequacy and pensions coverage among private sector workers, which is very, very low. And the replacement income provided by the state benefits, either the contributory or the non-contributory old age pension, are completely inadequate to deal with the sorts of costs that people are incurring now, such as rents. There's a real fear that you're going to have a generation rent that's going to reach retirement age and simply will not be able to pay for where they live. So auto-enrolment, it's one of those mom and apple pie discussions. We know it's a good thing. We know it's coming employers' way. We want to be part of it, but we also need the state and our employees to recognize that pension cost is just payroll cost. So whatever percentage we're talking about in terms of an employer contribution, that is the same percent for percent, euro for euro, as an adjustment to payroll cost. And the extent to which that goes up is the extent to which the labor cost of an enterprise goes up as well. And as I don't need to say on this call, that just becomes another cost of business, and businesses make their business decisions on that basis. So if labor becomes more expensive, businesses will seek greater efficiencies, they'll seek greater levels of productivity, and they'll seek lower levels of labor within the business. So once we're all on the same page and we all understand those basic principles, I think everyone's going to be happy with auto-enrolment.
I suppose, Neil, once we're all on the same page is a simple thing to say. I know from my own experience in Australia, they would package your salary and super together. They'll just say it's 50K together or 100K together. Do you think that's something you would see in the future in Ireland? I know you've kind of alluded to it there, but But do you think employers and employees respectively are ready to kind of package those things together?
No, certainly not. And that sort of discussion that you alluded to, Ian, does happen in Ireland, but it tends to happen for men and women of a certain age. Typically, they're all in their 50s, and when they're negotiating their package with their employer, there is a conscious net off between the employer's pension contribution and what the employee's salary is going to be. So people get it, and especially as you get older, because of the revenue rules on how much of your package you can divert into pension, it becomes very tax efficient to concede salary in favor of pension. But if you say that to your average employee, that, you know, I'm going to pay you €50,000 and you decide how much of that you want to go into pension, that's a very uncomfortable discussion for employees. So I think there's a real job of work to be done there on educating employees on the benefits of deferred income and deferred consumption and putting some of your income into a pension.
And that's why the tax relief is there, is that one of the last great incentives, you could say, for employees out there. I suppose, Dean, we're lucky in some ways in Ireland that we are behind the curve with auto-enrolment, so we can see Australia and I suppose UK culturally and quite close to us in terms of how it's gone in there. And I suppose the OECD have had a number of kind of recommendations and reports in this area. What's your view and your company's view in terms of the introduction to AE, and what lessons can Ireland learn from previous incarnations in other jurisdictions?
Well, I think auto-enrolment is hugely important, and it's hugely effective. So, you know, the sooner the better they can introduce it. You know, we tend to focus on Europe as a whole rather than just the Irish market. But if I think as an Irishman, in terms of what needs to happen at home, you know, we need to get this introduced as quickly as possible. And the beauty of auto-enrolment is that it does broaden pension coverage because people will tend to start making contributions. But really what hasn't been addressed in Ireland so far is what type of pension people will be saving into. And this is where the OECD Pensions Council come in last year. And they were the ones that said, look, you know, pensions are changing, people are living longer. There's a new way to do things better. If you look at the proposed rate, and Neil will probably get a bit nervous when I say this, but I think if my understanding is correct, they were talking about employees contributing 6% and employers contributing another 6%. Those of us that are in the pensions industry understand that this is not going to lead to adequate pensions. In an ideal world, it'd be 10 or 15% that everybody's contributing. But if you look at Chile last year, they tried to increase their very successful auto-enrolment scheme by getting people to contribute more, and people ended up burning cars in the street because they didn't want higher contribution rates. So the trick is that we need to get auto-enrolment live as quickly as possible, but we need the best auto-enrolment products. And in that respect, the OECD is now recommending that everybody adopts collective risk-sharing pensions rather than the old DC pensions that have been offered back since the 1980s. So the sooner the better it happens, but let's do the right auto-enrolment program.
Yeah, I think you make an interesting point that we've been discussing the IIPM as well on the behavioural side. You convince somebody once and you don't have to go back to them again and again if you're looking to increase rates, etc. I think just to maybe get back to you, Neil, I know in the IIPM we run courses in conjunction with Griffith College along with ourselves, and we're finalising module content for September. And there's a rate of change in the pensions industry which wouldn't go with the stereotype, shall we say, in terms of what we're seeing and some of the things I mentioned there. How hard is it for you and your membership to keep up with these things? I know we've touched on, or I mentioned a few of them, not only the amount of different things that are going on, but perhaps the lack of clarity in terms of planning for yourselves.
This is a hugely significant issue, Ian, for a small business. I mean, typically small business does not have a HR function. It does not have a person that is capable of giving advice on savings or pensions. An awful lot of small businesses don't even have someone doing the payroll, so it's an outsourced function. So when you have a person coming to you as an employer, and we're talking about, now we're actually not yet talking about it, because typically we don't see people in hospitality, in catering, in restaurants who in their 20s or 30s who are saving into a pensions product. But even where they do in a small business, an established, agri equipment supplier or a small regional solicitor's office, as employers, they view this as a personal responsibility, and they are going to need off-the-shelf solutions which does not require significant or indeed any resource, because they're not going to be, quite frankly, able to do it, and they're not going to be actually qualified to do it. So they're going to need reliable, cost-effective, off-the-shelf products that they can give to their employees and say, now it's just a question of how much we collectively, you and I, save into this product in respect of their pension for however long you're employed by us. Because of course, that's a very important thing now, because there's no such thing as a cradle to grave job anymore. Workers are portfolio workers. They'll move through a whole load of different employments, and that transition has to be seamless, easy, and cost-free ideally, otherwise just very low cost. So there's a huge amount in that from an employer's perspective, Ian.
And Neil, you mentioned a bigger point. We'll come on to Dean with the past portable, if that's a word I can use, nature of pensions or the lack of. Would you find in your membership, I know from my own day job in the industry, we would see trends emerging of the lack of pensions coverage on more transient industries. And you mentioned hospitality, construction is another big one in the Irish market as well. Whilst those SMEs of more, say, professional services, you use the example of the regional solicitor. I know we're talking in broad generalizations there, but would you see that from your membership in terms of the connection your members would have with their employees in different industries, given the nature of the workers in those industries? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And this is where those employers need some assistance. I mean, this is an area, for example, in the construction industry now, which is an industry where employee density is relatively lower. You have a huge number of subcontractors. You have a huge amount of contingent employment, but they have recognized there are now formal mechanisms in there for people working on building sites and all that to initiate a pension and to contribute to it. Construction businesses tend to be a bit larger on the SME business size scale, though, in terms of employees. So what we have to do is provide the tools to small employers. There's no point in the state just dumping a big pensions responsibility on a cafe or a hairdresser, because it will simply become too big and too unwieldy and unmanageable for them. Like we see trends, for example, in the grooming business, where people are running a salon with no employees. They're renting the chair, and they're doing that to exit the direct employee responsibility. And that trend is going to continue unless we make life easier for small employers. So we need simplicity at low cost and past portability. We need a product that it's very simple for the employer to give to the employee.
Yeah, and the idea of the gig economy and as you say, no more cradle to grave, or less of them, definitely, the way things work. I suppose to take that point and maybe just say it in a different way, Dean, on a larger scale, people moving across different countries. So obviously we're aware in Ireland of a particular nature of say the tech and the pharma industries. Has your experience on a European basis seen the rise of that sort of worker and the need for them to take pension benefits to with them? Ultimately, if you know as an employee, your nature of your work, the nature of your industry, you could work 3 years in 5 different countries across the next 15.
Yeah, well, I suppose I'd be the perfect use case for a passportable pension. You know, we're working from Spain this month, pending a return back. So I could definitely make the case for portability being very important. But I think, first of all, I'm very excited about what Neil just said, because Neil perfectly made the case for why we need these pan-European standardized pension products that offer low fees. And this is exactly what we as a firm are building. But one of the things that I'm sure Neil was thinking of, but he didn't mention, is that simplicity is very important. We need to keep it simple so that everybody can understand exactly what they're subscribing to, no matter what country they're in. But if I can, while we're touching on the idea of simple, portable pension products, which the PEPP is designed to bring about, I think it's important to clarify what PEPP is, because in March next year, any European pensions firm can offer products to Ireland, and any Irish pensions firm can offer product all across Europe. So there's a massive opportunity for Ireland in one respect to build a new fintech industry. On the other hand, you can have all these other operators coming in and offering competing products to the PRSA. So it's all very well for us to get in and start amending and improving and modernizing the PRSA, but everyone has to realize that as of March next year, there could be 200 other pension products being offered to Irish consumers, where the tax authorities are obliged under European law to give them equivalent tax treatment for the savers. So we want everything to get simpler. We want everything to digitize, especially for those people that are moving around. But it's about to become a very different type of industry in the next months.
I think Dean, any of our viewers today were probably looking out the window behind you and wondering what part of Ireland you were in with the weather out there today. I think simplicity is key, and I think that's key. Again, as an educational organisation, that's something we always talk about. Ease of understanding, builds buy-in, and goes forward with that. I suppose if we go back to Neil, the concept of us, whatever it might be, a 6 and 6 or an 8 and 8 or a 10 and 10, plus a tax relief, or whatever way it's phrased. Even the phrase tax relief can have a negative connotation with the word tax in there. Any sort of government contribution, what way it might be. What is your view on, it's very easy for us to say that we'll all share the burden in terms of the contributions going in. How does that look like, I suppose, in terms of the view between how much the state should shoulder this burden, how much the employer, and how much ultimate personal responsibility there should be on a worker? And how does that actually, if I could extend that question to, how should auto-enrolment benefits or contributions be linked or thought about with the existing state pension as well?
Well, ideally, we would like to see auto-enrolment as the model that would apply for all pensions. So everybody pays for their own pension. I mean, the demographic changes now that we're particularly seeing in the Western Hemisphere, we're seeing people live longer. I think the age at death now for a girl born today is very close in Ireland, very close to 100 years old. And that's going to imply an income requirement for at least 35 years after the current retirement date. It's just a little bit less for a male. I'm glad you touched on the tax relief. We need to start changing the language that's used. The revenue still talks about, and I mean, I have to say this is an area now that deeply frustrates people in the private sector when you hear the revenue talking about tax expenditure, as if the revenue is giving a private sector worker anything at all for their pension at the moment. There is no tax expenditure on pension savings, and in fact there's no tax relief. What there is deferred taxation. So a worker says to their employer, I don't want that euro of remuneration now, please put it in my pension and I will pay tax on that later. That is tax deferral. It is not tax avoided. It's not tax that worker is refusing to pay. And we have to understand that language. And the reason it's so important is, and again, I'm not going to name any companies now, but there is a well-known state transport company at the moment that is basically undergoing enforcement proceedings now from the pension regulator because of the inadequacy of their pension fund to meet liabilities. And they have been contributing 28% in respect of their employees into that pension fund, and it is effectively insolvent. So if people want to understand the sheer size of these liabilities, you know, Ireland, as of now, in the last evaluation of our pensions liability, unfunded liability in respect of salaried state employees, the contributory old age pension and the non-contributory old age pension, it's in excess of 450 billion euro in a context where our national debt is only 200 and whatever it is now, 20 or 30 billion. So the amounts of money that are unfunded now and liability unfunded are really, really significant. And we can no longer afford to have a state sector that is misrepresenting how we, the private sector, the 85% of the population, pay for pensions. It's really important to move that language and that context on and recognize the realities of where we are now.
I think that's really important. Again, it's something close to our heart. Is the idea of pensions coverage is the amount of people who have a pension, but that tells you nothing about how useful that pension is. Pensions adequacy can tell us a little bit more about that. And I think, to be fair to everybody involved in this, including ourselves, the idea is to let people have the retirement that they want, deserve, have saved for 50, 60 years, potentially in some space. And something we've looked at quite a lot is, I suppose, our conversation has focused so far on how you get into a pension or how difficult it can be to get into a pension. We might maybe just look a little bit about what you do once you're in a pension. What do you want your money to do? How should you be saving for your retirement? What sort of growth you should be looking at? So I know, Dean, you mentioned some of the OECD reports earlier on, and I know your firm are a strong proponent or have strong views on how people should save for a pension or what their money should do once they're in the pension, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, if you look at, just going back to what you were saying a second ago about the scale of the pension liabilities in Ireland already, I didn't know the market numbers, so it's very interesting to know that. But even if you look at a broader scale, the richest 20 OECD countries already have a pension shortfall of 80 trillion, which is double their stated national debt. And because people are living longer, as we all know, the expected pension shortfall in 2050, which is only 29 years away, is going to be 400 trillion, which is multiples of national debt. So the reality is that we have to accept that state pensions are over. The government can't afford to take care of people for retirement that could last 40 or 50 years. So the OECD have been trying to find a solution because this is completely unsustainable where it is at the moment. And the solution that they've agreed on and have recommended becomes mandatory is that we all enter into collective risk-sharing pensions, which is a subject that brought me into the pensions industry 4 years ago, and I just thought this is a major solution. But essentially what they're saying is that instead of everybody contributing to their own individual account and then having to worry about how much they draw every month in retirement, that everybody should pool their risk. Some people are going to live 10 years in retirement, some people are going to live 20, some people are going to live 40. And the idea, according to the OECD, is that if people pool their savings for retirement, that they will enjoy higher income levels in retirement. And I can put a number on that. The Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, which is where Einstein and 28 other Nobel Prize winners went, estimated that the value of pensioners pooling their income together for retirement enhances their pension wealth by 87%. So even if we look at the existing auto-enrolment rates, if people are putting 6% into a regular pension account, that is the equivalent of them saving 11% if they put it into a collective risk-sharing tontine or tontine annuity. as the OECD refers to. And this is why we're pushing to get this launched as quickly as possible, not just for Ireland, but across the whole of Europe.
Interesting. And the idea, I suppose, the shared risk then, and Dean, you obviously need to have shared characteristics or shared demographics, I suppose, for people going in, or is would you envisage this for everybody?
So I've been speaking around the world for the last 4 years on this, understanding what everybody wants and what everybody's comfortable with. What I can definitely tell you is that none of us three gents want to be in with the ladies, because the ladies are going to outlive us most likely. So the idea is to keep the product simple, to keep this pension simple so that everybody understands how it works, is that everybody will join in with a pool that is comprised of people similar to them in terms of same gender, similar age, similar contribution amount. And that's how we keep it simple.
There you go. It's interesting. So I suppose it's always important. I think at times the industry can talk quite a lot about, as I said a few moments ago, how you get into a pension and what the structure looks like. It doesn't maybe focus on the outcome quite as much as we need to. And I just want to say for anyone listening, the three of us do think it's a great thing that people are living longer. It does throw up some challenges on the pension side, of course, as well. Just on that kind of concept, Neil, of collective pooling or kind of sharing risk. When you talk about your membership and your organization being a proponent of a simplified solution, and I know a lot of your members will care about quite deeply about their employees and their friends with them and things like that. How arm's length do you feel your membership want to be in terms of getting into the conversation about picking funds or risk levels and things like that? And does a solution as Dean has proposed negate some of those kind of almost non-professional conversations, or you're straying into a slightly different area than your traditional relationship?
Well, to answer the first question, the employer wants to be not merely arm's length, they want to be completely removed. So the concept of the employer as trustee or anything to do with that, really, we need to avoid that now, because that's just another area where cost is going to arise. So if you attempt to put responsibility on the shoulders of people who have no technical or professional qualification to run pensions, all they're going to do is attempt to outsource that risk to people like you and Dean. So we've achieved nothing by actually doing it. And we need to, that sort of mock problem solving just isn't good enough anymore. We need, big, solid, reliable external funds that an employer can just say, I am not expert enough to direct you into this, but here we have, a state blue tick, blue chip, product A, product B, product C. As to the question you asked me on the shared risk and the Tontine product that Dean was talking about, when you look at that first, you kind of look, ooh, that's a bit strange, because I'm in this sort of bubble with a few thousand people of my gender and my age contributing the same amount. So it's almost who dies first sort of product. But if you think about it, that's exactly the way that your current employee PRSI works. So we all pay 4% state PRSI into the state fund. And that does not form part of our estate. So if you pay 4% employee PRSI all your life and you die at the age of 70, well, your payments die with you, and that's part of the big pool. Now, of course, it's a pay-as-you-go pool. That's the whole reason we have this enormous liability, is that the state has not the state being us has not adequately saved into that. Tontine is simply a different version of employee PRSI, but it's paid into a product where you effectively take on a known risk profile among people of similar age, gender, and contribution, as opposed to in state PRSI, you're putting it into a big black hole where some politicians say we need to pay the old age pensioners an extra $5 a week, and this makes no sense. So what I would represent a Tontine type product is a known risk versus an unfunded risk that we pay with employee PRSI.
Yes, which is an interesting point about the pay-as-you-go nature of the Irish Let's see a good points there. I just might give you a bit of a sense in terms of the things we discussed.
I think that, you know, it is Pensions Awareness Week, and we do want to broaden pensions coverage. But also, you know, I think a point close to your heart, Ian, is that we need to increase pensions adequacy, which Neil is fighting battles for at the moment to allow people to be able to increase the amount that they're saving. It's very important, but, you know, for us, you know, there's also an opportunity, you know, if we're talking about awareness of pensions, to understand that there's huge change coming. If you look at the telecoms industry, whatever it was 10, 15 years ago, when we went to an open, when they abolished roaming charges, back then we had Eircom was the equivalent of Ireland's PRSA. You know, it was totally dominant, but now, you know, the Irish mobile phone sector is dominated by non-Irish names. And the reality is, this is what's coming to the Irish pensions market next year. And that's why we've put together a PEP industry working group that we'd encourage people to come along and talk to, join, and, you know, let's start looking at how we can get Ireland positioned to be able to lead Europe in this new pensions paradigm that kicks off in 6 months.
And to you, Neil?
I would say that our conversation about pensions has historically has just been completely suboptimal. People don't want to talk about pensions. It's too confusing, and it's too confusing for me, and I deal with pensions quite a lot. So I think it is in the interest of everyone. It's in the interest of government, the revenue, pensions providers, but also the citizens to have an educated discussion about this, because it's not going to go away, and trying to figure out about your pension when you're 55 or 60 is too late. So we need to start actually having an educated conversation about people making adequate provision for their own pension, more or less from their first paycheck, whether that's at 18 or 20 or 21. And I think it's in everyone's interest, rather than politicians trying to make a political stroke out of an extra $5 on the old age pension. That just, as Dean said, that model of state pension provision is dead, because it just isn't the money to do it. And we really need to have, whether it's something like the Citizens' Assembly, where we take on these awkward discussions, but we really need to have those awkward discussions now.
Yep.
Perfect. Look, okay, I think that's all we have time for today. As I mentioned, plenty of food for thought. If you'd like further information, please, of course, log on to pensionsawarenessweek.ie as the programme of events continues throughout the week. My thanks again to Neil and Dean for the discussions today, and please do visit isme.ie or tontine.ie to see in further detail the work that both organisations are currently undertaking. Finally, for myself, for those interested in learning more about the nuts and bolts of what was discussed today, please do log on to iipm.ie or visit us on LinkedIn to learn more about the Institute and our courses. But with that, thank you very much for your time today, and enjoy the rest of Pensions Awareness Week 2021. Thank you.
Thanks very much.